Hello, everyone. A topic that has been on my mind ever since the recent interview that I did with Chitravina Ravikiran was about the lost art of conversation, the ability to have a dialogue. And in that context of the interview, several, including particularly my friends, have asked me in private as to why I talked to him. And some of them even went to the extent of asking, your interview was not as hard hitting as we would have expected. And then one of the other questions was about, given my own views about the Carnatic music fraternity, the art form, and the many criticisms that I've leveled in the past, they felt that the interview was conducted in a different light than my personal views. What have we lost in the recent social media phenomenon is the ability to talk to one another. And when we talk to one another, we expect to talk to someone of our own persuasion, people who reflect our beliefs, people who accept what we hold as truths. Essentially, the echo chamber has become the predominant malaise of the social media phenomenon. As much as social media gives you the freedom, it also gives you the freedom to be in your own cocoon. If I were to talk to only people with whom I agree, most often I would be talking into a mirror, and sometimes even that might be impossible. Let me tell this. I have spoken to many people over the past few years, particularly when my profile has become a little bit more public. And I don't know if I'm popular. I don't think so. I don't fool myself into thinking that I'm a opinion maker of any sort. I have a few friends. There are a few who value what I say, and there are a few who will disagree and still value what I say. That is all I think my circle is. Over the past years, I have spoken to a wide variety of people, men and women. And I have spoken to hardcore Hindutva people also. My predominant instinct is always one of intellectual curiosity. If you ask me who bores me most, or what kind of people bore me, what kind of people are uninteresting for me, are those that without an intellectual curiosity, those who are unwilling to step outside their usual confines, people who can't listen to an opposing opinion. And then, of course, people who can't articulate what they hold as an opinion. Those are all the people that I find as unattractive and boring and not worth engaging with. And I've spoken with a variety of people primarily to understand where they come from. If somebody holds a certain view, I would like to understand what are their premises, how are they drawing it out. Yes, we all post so many messages on Facebook and other media, but more often than not, they are instantaneous, they are knee-jerk reactions, and they often do not articulate what one may want to say appropriately. That's why I often reach out to people, and I have reached out to people through Facebook Messenger, through WhatsApp, and some have reached out to me asking why I said something. So we keep that dialogue, the bilateral communication going, and then always I would ask for a person's phone number. I've done this, and I would always say, if you don't feel free like giving your phone number out, don't. It's your liberty. And why do I ask for their phone number? It's just because I feel at some point I should talk. Facebook Messenger chats or WhatsApp chats are highly insufficient for me to flesh out a thought. So there is no replacement to actual talking. I'm yet to find one, and I'm yet to find anything that is effective for me, which is why I always believe in reaching out to people and talking to them, provided they are comfortable talking to me, and provided the privacy and other things are assured. So with all that, and sometimes I do say that, hey, this is perfectly off the record, I'm just trying to understand you. Hopefully, I have not breached that confidence so far. Sometimes I might say, hey, can I quote you? Or I'm going to write about this. And then I talk to someone. So, with that setting, this was a completely serendipitous set of an opportunity that presented itself where I was able to talk to Ravi Kiran. But anyway, what I felt is the kind of interviews were not like how some of the musicians have been interviewed in US, and how they go to understand the artist behind the art. So that with that understanding, I decided to interview him. And when I decided to interview him, the question was, what kind of an interview would it be? And now this one is, there are wide varieties of interviews depending on the context, depending on the person being interviewed. Like it could be a Tim Russert prosecutorial style interview of a politician running for the presidency, where Tim Russert pulls out past statements, assertions, policy positions of a candidate, and then tries to pin the candidate down to a contradiction or a clarity which the candidate is trying to slither out of. That is one kind of interview, that is one kind of a setting. And then there is the other kind of interview where it's more about letting the subject speak at length on a topic, where it's more about understanding where the person is coming from. I was not there to prove a point, and I was not there to disprove a point either. I wanted to understand him. I wanted to understand the person behind the music. That was the key motivation. It was not inquisition. That is not what I set out to make. And that doesn't mean that, first of all, we got to understand this. Both of us understood our areas of disagreements, right? It doesn't mean that we have to agree on everything in order to talk. Certainly not for an interview. That is just not going to happen. Do I agree with everything that he holds? No. Does he agree with everything that I have laid out? Absolutely no. And that's not my expectation at all. That's not the expectation with which I went. That's not the expectation with which I constructed the interviews either. There were no gotcha questions. It was not meant to, again, that's another thing. There could be a gotcha question in a certain format. Again, that is because when somebody's playing footsie, somebody's playing smart for a certain pandering, yes, you could put them on the mat and say, wait a minute, you said this. But that's not the environment in which we met. This is completely different. This is a very convivial atmosphere that we met in. We were meeting more as, I wouldn't say equals. He's a genius in a certain art form, and I am an outsider in that art form. And we were meeting as two individuals and talking. That's about it. And for me, everything is a learning process. For me, everything is a learning. Every time I write a blog, every time I write something, and when I read through stuff, it takes me through a discovery process. And that's what happened here too. Reading about What to Listen For in Music by Aaron Copland and Ted Gaia's How to Listen to Jazz, one thing that leaped out is, to be a good music aficionado, you need to listen. You need to listen. Listening is important in appreciating music. And one thing that I found so admirable in Ravi Kiran is, I actually had very lengthy prefaces as questions, primarily because I didn't want anyone to misunderstand me. I would have spoken for like 5 minutes before I asked him, so what's your opinion? And Ravi Kiran would not interrupt me even once during what I was talking. He was attentive to the nth degree, let me complete, grasp the full question, and he answered in full. I learned something from him on that. And another person who saw the interviews made that remark also. That person had no idea of Ravi Kiran, who he was, what his music was, etc. But that person's comment was, hey, wait a minute, this person really listens. Look at how he's intent. So that part I learned from him. And in this whole thing, I did learn a few other things. Yes, I have had some ideas and criticisms of Carnatic music and where it is situated as to why, for example, Carnatic musicians talk about it as a classical music and often talk about it in the breadth of Western classical than jazz, which I think is closer to Carnatic music because of the improvisational aspect of it. But Ravi Kiran situated it appropriately. He said, yes, the improvisational component is common, but also Carnatic music is extremely formulaic and formal as much as Western classical is. It is not as free-flowing and as informal as jazz is. So he kind of situated it beautifully for me. That's a learning. And that's all that I expected of all this. And that's then comes the question of separating the art from the artist. Yes, recently we see the controversies over Michael Jackson, and NPR had this segment about, can we still appreciate Michael Jackson's art? This has been a perennial question that people have struggled with. And it's not Jackson is just the latest in a long string of artists and geniuses who have given something to humanity and yet have another side that we are either horrified, we can not agree with. There's a whole range of things that these geniuses have done, from the mildly disagreeable to the horrifying that we will be like, oh my God, I don't want to be even seen holding a Michael Jackson CD. There's that, yes. Whether it is Wagner's anti-Semitism, Karl Marx was a philanderer, and Tolstoy, so on. You could go on to even Gandhi's experiments with women. And this is just not about the philandering and the women part of it. It's also about some of them have been outright cruel, fraudulent, so on and so forth. How do I sum up my attitude to this? It's very simple. I take the leaf out of how Will Durant sums up Voltaire. He said Voltaire had all the faults of his age, absolutely everything. But that is not the essence of Voltaire. The essence of Voltaire was the 90 volumes of writing that the man put forth, the fertile mind. He was a symbol of an era. Who enriches humanity should be celebrated. But the key distinction is, while we celebrate humanity, those achievements, those artists, let us not whitewash who they are. That I don't accept. Let us also be forthright about their shortcomings. Let us acknowledge it and then set it in context. If the shortfall is in direct contradiction with their principles that they're espousing, then that's a different discussion. For example, Dr. Radhakrishnan, he was an obsessive compulsive philanderer. His own son's biography lays it out. He was a complete philanderer. Once he was lecturing on the virtues of monogamy when his mistress was seated in the front row. That is not just a personal failing. It is not just hypocrisy. It is beyond that. And this is where we could certainly look at that in a certain harsh light, so to speak, and be forthright about it. And still, is that the essence of Radhakrishnan? No. The essence of Radhakrishnan is he was the best exponent of Hindu philosophy, and he set it on an academic plane when Western academicians saw Hindu philosophy as not as philosophy but as theology. It was Radhakrishnan who primarily spoke in the Western academic language and set Hindu philosophy in the academic framework. Now that is the essence of Radhakrishnan, not even the lecture on monogamy. Those things are common. So again, that is why I still would give the respect to the man because his primary achievement still is on a commendable plane. And again, there are so many people who speak about monogamy and are not monogamous. But have they written 2 wonderful volumes on Indian philosophy? No. And that is his contribution for history and to a great culture. So that is the part that we need to separate out and have a maturity about. And that's what I was aiming in the conversations. And certainly it was not my intent to embarrass him. And one thing I will say, he had already told me it was a no-holds-barred interview. There was no questions were shared with him. And there was no conditions set as to what I could talk. But I just felt I didn't need to go to a certain place. The controversies have been spoken about in public. He has given his explanations. I have written about it. And it's there for everyone to draw it. He was one of the rare Carnatic musicians who is extremely articulate. And again, for the umpteenth time, let me say, when I watched him teach, I saw my father in that. His approach to teaching is precisely what my father had towards teaching. Whereas here he was always underscoring that the greatest performer could be studied, learned, and repeated. Those were the things that I found in him. And it was a very personable interaction. It was wonderful. I would still do it again. And I hope to do it with a few more. And I'll talk to a wide variety of people. I have always done that. I don't know why it was a surprise this time, whether it was talking to Jayamohan or anyone. I have always talked. And they have been kind to talk to me. That's the other part, right? It's not like I'm extremely popular or I have a body of work, of critically acclaimed work, for them to consider that way. But still, it was Jayamohan's generosity to say, Aravindan, I'll stay with you. It's not my generosity to say I will host him. It was his generosity, given what I have written about him, and he has written about me, that we met and we had fun. We had fun for 2 days. Absolutely. Let's not lose the art of conversing with one another. That doesn't mean that we have to take everything at face value. That doesn't mean that we abandon who we are, but try to understand who the other person is. Where are they coming from? What constitutes their opinions? How do they frame this value or belief or opinion? And that will help us probably, maybe sometimes counter it. I talked to a friend of mine who is an avowed Modi supporter. Every day. I talk to him every day. In a certain way, as much as I would say that I am patient with him, he's patient with me too. Of course, our friendship goes more than 20, 30 years. We have been friends since college. And yet we talk with each other. We know our disagreements. And yes, there have been some moments when we almost could see the friction in a WhatsApp message. I'm sure he felt it from me. And I have felt it from him. So, but nevertheless, there is of course, here there is a certain personal equation also. So that keeps it going. But that aside, there is a certain healthy competition here. And that I cherish. And I will always keep doing this. And I love talking to people. It's that simple. Thanks.